When my mother told me that women my age shouldn't dress like that, I smiled and nodded. When she said it again at the grocery store, I laughed it off. But when she said it in front of my teenage daughter and made her feel ashamed of her own mother, I knew exactly what I was going to wear to her 70th birthday party. The look on her face when I walked in was worth every single stare I got that night. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would cause a scene at a family gathering, but then again I never thought I'd be 42 and single again either. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? My name is Jessica, and if you had told me 3 years ago that I'd be living alone in a downtown apartment, working as a freelance graphic designer, and wearing clothes that made my conservative mother clutch her pearls, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are. It all started when my marriage to David fell apart. 20 years of what I thought was a solid partnership crumbled in 6 months when I discovered he'd been having an affair with his dental hygienist. Classic, right? The divorce was messy, expensive, and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. But you know what they say about hitting rock bottom, the only way to go is up. After the divorce was finalized, I moved out of our suburban house with the white picket fence and the perfectly manicured lawn into a small but charming apartment in the Arts District. It was the first time in my adult life that I got to choose where I lived, how I decorated, what I ate for dinner. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. My daughter Emma, who was 16 at the time, split her time between David's house and mine, and I was determined to show her that sometimes starting over isn't the end of the world. It's the beginning of a new chapter. The first sign of trouble with my mother came during one of Emma's weekend visits. We were getting ready to go to brunch at this cute little bistro downtown, and I had put on a sundress that I absolutely loved. It was coral-colored with thin straps and hit just above my knees. Nothing scandalous, nothing inappropriate, just a pretty dress that made me feel good about myself for the first time in months. When Emma saw me, she smiled and said I looked beautiful. That compliment meant everything to me. But when my mother arrived to pick up some of Emma's school books that had accidentally been left at my place, her reaction was quite different. She took one look at me and pursed her lips in that way that I remembered from my teenage years. "Jessica," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of disapproval that could freeze water, "don't you think that dress is a bit much for someone your age?" I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, not just for myself but because Emma was standing right there watching this interaction unfold. "What do you mean, Mom?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "I mean," she continued, adjusting her own conservative blouse as if to make a point, "that you're a mother, not a college student. There comes a time when women need to dress their age and stop trying to recapture their youth." Emma looked between us, clearly uncomfortable, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a dress, this was about my mother's inability to see me as anything other than the role she had assigned to me decades ago. Wife, mother, suburban homemaker, those were the boxes she was comfortable with me occupying. This new version of me, the one who lived in the city and wore sundresses and was figuring out who she was outside of her marriage, was threatening to her sense of order. "I think Mom looks great," Emma said quietly, and I wanted to hug her for her loyalty. My mother turned to Emma with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course you do, sweetheart, you love your mother. But someday you'll understand that there are appropriate ways for women to dress at different stages of life." After she left, I went back to my bedroom and stared at myself in the full-length mirror that I had bought specifically because it made me feel confident. The woman looking back at me didn't look desperate or inappropriate. She looked happy, healthy, and yes, attractive. But my mother's words had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. Over the following weeks, I found myself second-guessing my clothing choices. When I went to client meetings, I chose more conservative outfits. When I went out with the few friends I had made in my new neighborhood, I opted for longer sleeves and higher necklines. I told myself it was just easier this way, that I didn't need the hassle of my mother's commentary. But the truth was, her words had gotten under my skin in a way that surprised me. The pattern continued for months. Every family gathering, every casual encounter, my mother would find something to criticize about my appearance. My jeans were too tight, my tops were too low, my dresses were too short, my makeup was too bright. It was as if she had appointed herself the fashion police of my life, and I was constantly in violation. What made it worse was that she never said these things when we were alone. There was always an audience. Emma, my brother Marcus, my sister-in-law Kelly, random relatives at family functions. The criticism always came wrapped in concern, delivered with that particular brand of passive-aggressive love that mothers have perfected over generations. "I'm just worried about the impression you're giving," she would say. Or, "I don't want people to get the wrong idea about you." As if my choice to wear a sleeveless blouse was somehow a moral failing that would reflect poorly on the entire family. The breaking point came 3 months ago at my nephew's graduation party. I had spent a lot of time choosing my outfit. A navy blue wrap dress that was professional but feminine, paired with nude heels and simple jewelry. I thought I looked appropriate for the occasion, put together but not overdressed. Emma was with me, and she had complimented my outfit when I picked her up from David's house. We were standing in my brother's backyard, watching my nephew accept congratulations from various family members, when my mother approached us with that familiar look of disapproval etched on her face. She glanced at my dress, then at Emma, then back at me. "Jessica," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the people nearby to hear, "I have to ask, what message do you think you're sending to Emma when you dress like that?" I felt the familiar flush of embarrassment creep up my neck, but this time there was something else alongside it. Anger, pure clean anger that started in my chest and spread outward like wildfire. She wasn't just criticizing me anymore, she was using my daughter as ammunition. "What message am I sending?" I repeated, my voice carefully controlled. "That it's appropriate for women to dress like teenagers well into their 40s, she said, her eyes scanning my dress as if it were made of something offensive. "That there's no dignity in aging gracefully, that seeking male attention is more important than setting a good example." The conversation around us had quieted, and I could feel people's eyes on us. Emma was looking down at her shoes, clearly mortified by being dragged into this public critique of her mother's character. My brother Marcus was pretending to be very interested in the contents of his beer bottle, and Kelly had suddenly developed a fascination with her phone screen. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I think you're reading a lot into a simple dress." "Am I?" she asked, raising her eyebrows in that way that suggested I was being naive. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having some kind of midlife crisis and dragging the rest of us along for the ride." That's when Emma looked up, and I saw something in her eyes that made my heart break a little. She was embarrassed, yes, but not of me. She was embarrassed for me. She could see what I was just beginning to understand, that I had been allowing my mother to make me smaller, to dim my light, to apologize for taking up space in the world. "Emma thinks I look nice," I said, reaching for my daughter's hand. "That's the only opinion that matters to me." My mother's expression softened for a moment, as if she realized she had gone too far. But then she straightened her shoulders and delivered what I now recognize as the final straw. "Emma is 17, she said. "She doesn't understand yet that there are consequences to dressing inappropriately. She doesn't understand that people judge us by how we present ourselves. Someday she'll thank me for teaching her the difference between dressing with class and dressing for attention." The implication was clear. I was a bad influence on my own daughter. I was teaching her the wrong lessons about womanhood, about dignity, about what it meant to age with grace. And Emma heard every word of it. That night, after we got home, Emma and I sat on my couch with cups of tea and talked for hours. She told me how uncomfortable these interactions with her grandmother made her feel, how she didn't understand why loving yourself and feeling confident in your appearance was somehow wrong. She told me she thought I looked beautiful and happy, and that seeing me embrace my independence after the divorce had actually taught her valuable lessons about resilience and self-worth. "Grandma acts like you're doing something wrong," Emma said, curling up next to me on the couch. "But you're not, you're just living your life." That conversation changed something fundamental in me. I realized that by allowing my mother to police my choices, I wasn't just hurting myself. I was teaching Emma that women should shrink themselves to make others comfortable. I was showing her that a woman's worth was determined by how well she conformed to other people's expectations, rather than how authentic she was to herself. The next morning, I went through my closet and pulled out all the clothes I had been avoiding, because they might attract my mother's criticism. The sundresses, the fitted jeans, the tops that showed my shoulders, the dresses that celebrated my figure instead of hiding it. I held each piece up to the light and asked myself a simple question: does this make me feel confident and beautiful? If the answer was yes, it stayed. If the answer was no, it went. By the end of the day, I had reclaimed my wardrobe, and more importantly, my sense of self. I wasn't dressing to attract attention or to prove a point. I was dressing to honor the woman I had become, someone who had survived a difficult divorce, rebuilt her life from scratch, raised a smart and compassionate daughter, and learned to find joy in small pleasures like a perfectly fitting dress, or a lipstick that made her smile. For the next few months, I made a conscious effort to wear what made me feel good, regardless of potential family commentary. When I picked Emma up from school, I wore the clothes that reflected my personality. When I met with clients, I chose outfits that made me feel professional and confident. When I went out with friends, I celebrated my body and my style without apology. The criticism from my mother continued, but something had shifted in how I received it. Instead of internalizing her comments and questioning my choices, I began to see them for what they really were. Reflections of her own discomfort with change, her own fears about aging, her own struggles with a world that was evolving faster than she could adapt to. Women our age, she would say, as if we were part of some homogeneous group, with identical experiences and identical rules. But I wasn't part of her we. I was me Jessica, a woman who had loved and lost and found herself again, who was learning to navigate the world on her own terms, who was teaching her daughter that there was no expiration date on feeling beautiful or powerful or alive. The real test came when my mother announced that she was having a big party for her 70th birthday. The whole family would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, people from her church. She had rented out the community center and hired a catering company. It was going to be a formal affair, she said, and she hoped everyone would dress appropriately. When she called to give me the details, I could hear the subtext in her voice. This was my chance to prove that I could be the daughter she wanted. Conservative, understated, age-appropriate. This was my opportunity to show that I had learned my lesson about the importance of dressing with dignity, rather than for attention. It's going to be such a special night, she said. I've invited everyone who matters to me, and I just want everything to be perfect. Of course, Mom, I said. I wouldn't miss it, but as I hung up the phone, I was already planning exactly what I was going to wear, and it wasn't going to be anything my mother would consider appropriate for a woman my age. I spent weeks planning my outfit for the party, not because I wanted to cause drama or make a scene, but because I wanted to make a statement that was long overdue. I wanted to show up as my authentic self, not as the version of me that my mother was more comfortable with. I wanted Emma to see that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and the people who matter to you is to refuse to be diminished. The dress I chose was stunning. A deep emerald green that brought out the color of my eyes, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that swirled when I moved. It had thin straps and showed just enough shoulder to be elegant without being inappropriate. The neckline was modest but flattering, and the length hit just at my knees. It was exactly the kind of dress that made me feel like the best version of myself. I paired it with heels that made my legs look miles long, jewelry that caught the light when I moved, and makeup that enhanced my features without looking overdone. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who was comfortable in her own skin, who had weathered storms and come out stronger, who wasn't afraid to take up space in the world. Emma was spending the weekend at her father's house, so she wouldn't be at the party. Part of me was relieved. I didn't want her to witness whatever reaction my outfit was going to provoke. But another part of me wished she could be there to see me finally standing up for myself in a way that mattered. The community center was decorated with silver and gold balloons, white tablecloths, and centerpieces that my mother had probably spent weeks planning. The guest list was exactly what I had expected. The same group of people who had been commenting on my life choices for months. The same relatives who thought they had a right to opinions about my personal decisions. The same family friends who believed that a woman's value decreased with age unless she adhered to very specific rules about behavior and appearance. When I walked through the door, conversations stopped. Not because my dress was inappropriate, or because I looked ridiculous, but because I looked confident and beautiful, and completely unapologetic about both. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, and then the normal party chatter resumed, though I could feel eyes following me as I made my way across the room. My mother saw me from across the room, where she was greeting guests near the gift table. Our eyes met, and I watched her expression change from surprise to shock to something that looked very much like anger. She excused herself from her conversation and walked toward me with the kind of purposeful stride that I remembered from my childhood when I was in serious trouble. "Jessica," she said when she reached me, her voice low but unmistakably furious. "What do you think you're doing?" "Celebrating your birthday," I replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek, as if nothing was wrong. "You look lovely, Mom. Happy birthday." But she wasn't going to be deflected by pleasantries. She grabbed my arm and steered me toward a corner of the room where we could speak more privately, though I could still feel the curious gazes of other party guests following us. "This is my birthday party," she hissed. "My birthday party, with my friends and my family, and you show up dressed like you're going clubbing." I looked down at my dress, genuinely confused by her reaction. "Mom, this is a perfectly appropriate cocktail dress. It's not too short, it's not too tight, and it's certainly not clubwear. You know exactly what you're doing," she said, her eyes flashing with an anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"You're trying to make me look bad in front of everyone who matters to me." And that's when I understood what this was really about. This wasn't about my dress, or my age, or even my appropriateness as a role model for Emma. This was about control. This was about my mother's inability to accept that I had changed, that I had grown beyond the narrow definition of womanhood that she was comfortable with, that I was no longer willing to shrink myself to make her feel better about her own choices. "I'm not trying to make you look bad," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was racing. "I'm just trying to look good. There's a difference. At your age," she snapped. And there it was again, the phrase that had been haunting me for months. "At your age, Jessica, you should know better. You should have more dignity than this." The word dignities hung in the air between us like a weapon, as if dignity was something that could be measured by the length of my skirt or the height of my heels. As if dignity wasn't about self-respect and authenticity, and the courage to be yourself even when the people around you would prefer a more convenient version. "What exactly is undignified about this dress?" I asked, genuinely curious about her logic. She looked me up and down as if the answer should be obvious. "Everything," she said. "The way it clings to your body, the way it shows your shoulders, the way it draws attention to you instead of letting you fade into the background like a woman your age should." And there it was, the heart of the issue. She wanted me to fade into the background. She wanted me to become invisible, to apologize for existing, to dress like I was already dead. She wanted me to accept that my time for being seen and celebrated and desired was over, that I should gracefully step aside and make room for younger women to take center stage. But I wasn't ready to fade into the background. I wasn't ready to apologize for taking up space, or for feeling beautiful, or for refusing to accept that my life was essentially over just because I was divorced and 42. I had too much living left to do, too many dreams left to chase, too many reasons to celebrate the woman I had become. "I'm not going to fade into the background," I told her, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not going to dress like I'm ashamed of my body or my age or my choices. I'm not going to teach Emma that women have an expiration date for confidence and beauty and joy." My mother's face was flushed now, and I could see that we were starting to attract more attention from the other party guests. "This is not about Emma," she said, but we both knew that wasn't true. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's about what I'm teaching her about being a woman, and I want to teach her that she never has to apologize for being herself, that she never has to make herself smaller to make other people more comfortable, that there's no age limit on feeling beautiful and confident and worthy of love." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my brother Marcus, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but inserting himself into this family drama. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, his eyes darting between my mother and me. "Everything's fine," my mother said, but her voice was tight with anger. "Your sister just has some interesting ideas about appropriate party attire." Marcus looked at my dress, and then at my mother, clearly trying to figure out what the problem was. "You look nice, Jess," he said finally, which earned him a sharp look from our mother. "Thank you," I said, grateful for the support even though I could see it was making him uncomfortable to be caught between us. The rest of the evening passed in a strange kind of tension. I made conversation with relatives I hadn't seen in months, accepted compliments on my dress from several family friends, and danced with my Uncle Robert, who told me I looked radiant. But I could feel my mother watching me throughout the night, could sense her disapproval radiating across the room like a cold front. When it came time for the birthday toast, I raised my glass with everyone else and wished my mother a happy birthday. I meant it, despite everything that had happened between us. I loved her, even when I didn't like her very much. I wanted her to be happy, even when her vision of happiness seemed to require my diminishment. But as I stood there in that community center, surrounded by family and wearing a dress that made me feel like the best version of myself, I realized something important. I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her to understand my choices or validate my decisions. I needed to live my life in a way that honored the woman I had become and the lessons I wanted to pass on to my daughter. The green dress wasn't just fabric and thread. It was a declaration of independence, a refusal to accept limitations that had been placed on me by someone else's fears and insecurities. It was a celebration of everything I had survived, and everything I had yet to become. That night after the party, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversations, the looks, the way my mother's face had hardened when she saw me in that green dress, but what kept me awake wasn't regret or shame. It was something much more unsettling. It was the realization that this pattern had been going on my entire life, and I had been too afraid or too conditioned to see it clearly. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, writing down every memory I could recall of my mother commenting on my appearance, my choices, my decisions. The list grew longer than I expected, stretching back decades to moments I had buried or dismissed as normal mother-daughter friction. When I was 14, she told me my homecoming dress made me look desperate for attention. When I was 18 and heading to college, she suggested I choose clothes that wouldn't give boys the wrong impression. When I was 25 and got engaged to David, she insisted I needed to lose 10 pounds before the wedding because the dress looked too tight. When I was 30 and pregnant with Emma, she criticized my maternity clothes for being too form-fitting, saying pregnant women should be modest above all else. The pattern was always the same. My appearance was somehow a reflection on her, my choices were somehow her responsibility, my confidence was somehow a threat to the natural order of things. She had spent 30 years teaching me that being seen was dangerous, that standing out was selfish, that taking up space was inappropriate for someone like me. But what someone like me? As I sat there in my quiet apartment, still wearing the green dress, because I wasn't ready to take it off yet, I tried to define what my mother thought someone like me should be: invisible, grateful, small, apologetic, a supporting character in everyone else's story, never the protagonist of my own. The next morning, I called my best friend Sarah, who had moved to Portland 2 years earlier but remained my closest confidant, despite the distance. I told her about the party, about the dress, about the confrontation with my mother. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of recognition or sympathy. "Jess," she said, when I finished, "I have to tell you something. I've been waiting for you to figure this out for years." "Figure what out?" "That your mother has been emotionally manipulating you since we were teenagers. Do you remember when we were 17, and you got asked to prom by that guy Jake from chemistry class?" I remembered. Jake had been sweet and funny, and I had been over the moon when he asked me. I had found the perfect dress, a simple but elegant navy blue gown that made me feel like a princess. I had been so excited to show my mother. "You came to school the next week and said you weren't going to prom anymore." Sarah continued, "You said your mother thought you were too young for formal dances, and that Jake probably only asked you because he felt sorry for you. But Jess, that's not what happened, is it?" The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. My mother hadn't said I was too young for prom. She had looked at me in that navy dress and said I looked like I was trying too hard, that the dress was too mature for someone my age, that I should be careful not to give Jake expectations I wasn't prepared to meet. She had made me feel silly and inappropriate and somehow dirty for wanting to go to a school dance with a boy I liked. She made me return the dress, I said quietly, the shame of that memory still fresh after all these years. She said it was a waste of money for one night, but that wasn't really why. "No, it wasn't," Sarah agreed. "And do you remember what happened the week after prom?" I did remember. My mother had taken me shopping and bought me a new outfit. A conservative skirt and blouse set that she said was much more appropriate for someone my age. She had told me how proud she was, that I had made the mature decision not to go to prom. How relieved she was that I wasn't boy crazy like some of the other girls in my class. She rewarded me for making myself smaller, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Bingo, Sarah said, and she's been doing it ever since. Every time you've tried to step into your own power, she's found a way to make you feel like you were doing something wrong. We talked for another hour, and Sarah helped me see patterns I had been blind to for decades. When I had gotten promoted at my old job, my mother had worried aloud about me becoming too career-focused and neglecting my family. When David and I had bought our first house, she had commented that it was awfully big for a young couple, implying we were being pretentious. When I had started taking yoga classes after Emma was born, she had suggested that my time would be better spent at home with my baby. Every achievement, every moment of joy, every step toward independence had been met with subtle criticism, designed to make me question my choices, and retreat back to the safe small space she was comfortable with me occupying. And I had fallen for it every single time, interpreting her manipulation as concern, her control as love. The thing is, Sarah said before we hung up, she's not going to stop just because you wore one dress to one party. This is who she is, and she's going to escalate until you either give in or set some serious boundaries. Sarah was right. 3 days after the party, my mother called me with what she called a family intervention. She had spoken to Marcus and Kelly, she said, and they were all concerned about my recent behavior. They thought I might be going through some kind of breakdown related to the divorce, and they wanted to help me get back on track. What kind of help? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Well, Marcus thinks you might benefit from talking to someone. A counselor maybe, who could help you process the divorce in a healthier way. And Kelly knows a wonderful personal shopper who specializes in helping women dress appropriately for their age and lifestyle. I almost laughed at the transparency of it. They wanted to fix me, to mold me back into the version of myself that didn't threaten their sense of order. They wanted to medicate my confidence and stylize my authenticity, until I was once again the compliant daughter who never caused waves or made anyone uncomfortable. I don't need a counselor or a personal shopper, I said. I need my family to respect my autonomy as an adult woman. There was a long pause. Jessica, my mother said, her voice taking on that particular tone that had always made me want to apologize for existing. We're just worried about you. This isn't like you. Maybe this is exactly like me, I replied. Maybe this is who I've always been underneath all the rules and expectations and criticism. Maybe you just never bothered to find out because you were too busy trying to turn me into someone else. That's not fair, she said, but her voice lacked conviction, isn't it? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want? When was the last time you celebrated my choices, instead of critiquing them? She couldn't answer, which was an answer in itself. The conversation ended badly, with my mother hanging up on me after informing me that I was being ungrateful and hurtful to people who only wanted what was best for me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't call her back to apologize. I didn't send flowers or write a letter explaining my position or beg for forgiveness. I just let it be. Over the next few weeks, the family pressure intensified. Marcus called to tell me that I was hurting our mother's feelings, and that maybe I should consider therapy, not because there was anything wrong with me, but because the divorce had clearly affected me more than I wanted to admit. Kelly sent me links to articles about age-appropriate fashion and dressing for your body type, with little notes about how helpful she found them. Even my Aunt Patricia, who I barely spoke to, called to say she was praying for me, and hoped I would find my way back to the Lord's path of modesty and humility. The worst part was that they all presented their interventions as acts of love and concern. They weren't trying to control me. They insisted they were trying to help me. They could see that I was struggling, that I was making choices that weren't in my best interest, and they felt obligated as family members to guide me back to the right path. But what they couldn't see, or refused to acknowledge, was that their version of the right path required me to abandon everything I had learned about myself in the past 3 years. It required me to go back to being invisible, apologetic, and small. It required me to teach Emma that women should apologize for taking up space, that confidence was arrogance, that aging meant accepting limitations imposed by other people's discomfort. The breaking point came when Emma was staying with me for the weekend, and my mother showed up unannounced with shopping bags full of what she called more appropriate clothing options. She had taken it upon herself to go shopping for me, she explained, because she could see that I was having trouble making good decisions for myself. I brought some lovely blouses, she said, unpacking conservative button-down shirts in beige and navy. And some very nice slacks that would be perfect for your client meetings. Nothing too fitted, nothing that would send the wrong message. Emma watched this entire interaction with wide eyes, clearly trying to process why her grandmother thought it was acceptable to show up at our apartment with replacement clothes for her mother. I could see the confusion on her face, the way she was trying to reconcile the confident, independent woman I had become with the person my mother was treating like a child who couldn't dress herself. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "I appreciate the thought, but I don't need new clothes. I'm perfectly capable of choosing my own wardrobe." "Are you though?" my mother asked, and there was something almost pitying in her voice. "Because some of the choices you've been making lately suggest otherwise." That's when Emma spoke up. "Grandma," she said, her 17-year-old voice clear and strong, "there's nothing wrong with how Mom dresses. She looks beautiful and confident, and I don't understand why you keep trying to make her feel bad about it." My mother turned to Emma with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you're young. You don't understand how important it is for women to present themselves appropriately. Your mother is setting an example for you, and I want to make sure it's a good one." "It is a good example," Emma said, and I could hear the frustration building in her voice. "She's showing me that women don't have to disappear when they get older. She's showing me that it's okay to like how you look and to dress in ways that make you happy." "Emma," my mother said, her voice taking on that authoritative tone that brooked no argument, "when you're older you'll understand that there are more important things than happiness. There's dignity and respect in knowing your place in the world." I watched my daughter's face change as she processed what her grandmother had just said. The idea that happiness was less important than conformity, that dignity meant accepting limitations, that knowing your place meant staying small, these concepts were so foreign to the way I had raised her that she literally couldn't compute them. "Knowing your place," Emma repeated. "What does that even mean?" My mother looked at me as if this question was evidence of my failings as a parent. "It means understanding that we all have roles to play in life, and that trying to be something you're not will only lead to disappointment and embarrassment." "But who decides what role Mom is supposed to play?" Emma asked. "Who gets to decide that she's supposed to dress like she's invisible just because she's 42 and divorced?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized that my 17-year-old daughter had just articulated something I had been struggling to understand for months. Who did get to decide? Why had I given my mother the authority to determine what was appropriate for my life, my body, my choices? "Emma," my mother said, her voice sharpening, "you're being disrespectful." "No," Emma said, standing up straighter, "I'm being honest. You've been making Mom feel bad about herself for months, and I don't understand why. She's happy, she's successful, she's a good mother, and she looks great. Why isn't that enough?" I felt something break open in my chest watching my daughter defend me with such clarity and conviction. She could see what I had been too conditioned to recognize, that my mother's criticism had nothing to do with love or concern, and everything to do with control and fear. "Emma," I said softly, "why don't you go to your room for a few minutes? I need to talk to Grandma alone." Emma looked between us, clearly reluctant to leave me alone with someone who had just dismissed her concerns and invalidated her perspective. But she nodded and left the room, though I could tell she was listening from the hallway. "She's disrespectful," my mother said as soon as Emma was gone. "You've raised her to have no regard for authority or tradition." "I've raised her to think for herself," I replied. "I've raised her to question things that don't make sense and to stand up for people she loves." "If you think that's disrespectful, then we have very different definitions of what good parenting looks like." My mother sat down heavily in my living room chair, looking suddenly older than her 70 years. "I don't understand what happened to you," she said, and for the first time she sounded genuinely sad rather than angry. "You used to be such a good daughter, you used to listen to my advice and trust my judgment. Now you act like I'm the enemy." I sat down across from her, trying to find words that would help her understand without causing more pain than necessary. "You're not the enemy, Mom, but you're not right about everything either, and I'm not a child anymore. I haven't been a child for a very long time." "I know you're not a child," she said, "but you're still my daughter, and I still worry about you." "But your worry is controlling me," I said. "It's making me smaller. It's teaching Emma that women should apologize for existing, that we should hide ourselves to make other people more comfortable. Is that really what you want me to pass on to her? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I just want you to be safe, she whispered. I want you to be protected from judgment and disappointment and all the cruel things people say about women who don't follow the rules. And there it was, the fear underneath all the criticism, all the control, all the attempts to make me smaller. She wasn't trying to punish me for being confident or beautiful, or independent. She was trying to protect me from a world that she believed would punish me for those things. Mom, I said gently, I can't live my life trying to avoid other people's judgment. I can't teach Emma to hide her light because some people might be uncomfortable with how brightly it shines. That's not protection. That's prison. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. But what if you get hurt? What if people say terrible things about you? What if Emma learns the wrong lessons? Then I'll deal with it, I said. And Emma will learn that women can survive criticism, that we can handle other people's discomfort, that our worth isn't determined by how well we conform to expectations that were never meant to serve us in the first place. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 3 decades of misunderstanding settling between us like dust. I could see her struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the woman sitting in front of her. I could see her trying to understand how love and control had become so tangled in her mind that she couldn't separate them anymore. I don't know how to stop worrying, she finally said. I don't know how to watch you make choices. I don't understand and just trust that you know what you're doing. You start by asking me how I'm doing instead of telling me what I'm doing wrong, I said. You start by trusting that I'm an adult who can handle the consequences of my own decisions. You start by believing that I raised Emma well enough that she can tell the difference between confidence and arrogance, between self-respect and selfishness. She nodded slowly, though I could see the struggle in her face. 42 years of one kind of relationship couldn't be changed overnight, but at least we were finally talking about the real issues instead of dancing around them. What about the clothes I brought? She asked, gesturing toward the shopping bags still sitting by the door. I looked at the bags full of beige blouses and conservative slacks, clothes designed to help me disappear rather than celebrate who I was. You should return them, I said. And next time you want to do something nice for me, ask me what I actually want first. She picked up the bags with hands that shook slightly, either from emotion or from the difficulty of letting go of 30 years of trying to manage my life. At the door she turned back to look at me. The green dress, she said quietly. You did look beautiful in it. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. After she left, Emma emerged from her room and sat next to me on the couch. Are you okay? She asked. I think so, I said. I think I'm finally starting to understand some things I should have figured out a long time ago. Like what? Like the difference between love and control. Like the fact that other people's comfort isn't my responsibility. Like the importance of teaching you that you never have to make yourself smaller to make other people feel bigger. Emma leaned against me, and we sat quietly for a while processing everything that had just happened. I thought about the scared, apologetic woman I had been just a few months earlier. Always second-guessing herself, always worried about other people's opinions, always dimming her light to avoid casting shadows on anyone else. That woman was gone, and I didn't miss her. In her place was someone stronger, someone clearer about her own worth, someone ready to fight for her right to take up space in the world. Someone ready to teach her daughter that there was no expiration date on confidence, no age limit on beauty, no point at which women were required to step aside and fade into the background. The green dress was hanging in my closet, waiting for the next occasion when I wanted to feel powerful and beautiful and completely myself. And I had a feeling there would be many such occasions in the years to come. The real test came 6 weeks later when my mother invited me to her book club's annual charity luncheon. She had been a member of this group for 15 years, and their fundraising events were always formal affairs attended by what she called the important women in town. These were the wives of prominent businessmen, retired teachers, church leaders, and community volunteers, who formed the social backbone of our conservative suburb. I'd really like you to come, she said during our weekly phone call, her voice carefully neutral. It would mean a lot to me to have you there. I could hear the olive branch in her invitation, the tentative attempt to rebuild our relationship on new terms. Since our conversation in my apartment, we had been slowly finding our way back to each other, having actual discussions instead of her delivering monologues about my shortcomings. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when I could see her biting her tongue to keep from commenting on my choices, but it was progress. "What's the dress code?" I asked, and I could practically hear her weighing her response. "Business casual," she said finally. "Nothing too formal, just nice." I agreed to attend, partly because I wanted to support her charity work, and partly because I was curious to see how she would navigate introducing me to her social circle now that our dynamic had shifted. Would she revert to her old patterns when faced with the judgment of her peers, or had our conversations actually changed something fundamental between us? The luncheon was held at the country club, where my parents had been members for 20 years. The dining room was decorated with spring flowers and white linens, and about 30 women were scattered around tables set for 6. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A navy blazer over a silk camisole with tailored slacks and moderate heels. Professional but feminine, appropriate but not apologetic. When I walked in, I could feel the subtle shift in energy that always happened when someone new entered an established social group. Conversations paused momentarily as eyes assessed and catalogued, making snap judgments about everything from my clothing, to my posture, to the confidence in my stride. My mother introduced me around the room with what seemed like genuine pride. "This is my daughter Jessica," she would say. "She's a graphic designer, very talented. She just finished a project for that new boutique hotel downtown." No comments about my divorce, no apologies for my appearance, no subtle undermining disguised as maternal concern. Just straightforward introductions that acknowledged my professional accomplishments and treated me like a competent adult. It was such a departure from her usual behavior that I almost didn't recognize this version of my mother. We were seated at a table with 4 other women, including Margaret Whitfield, who had taught English at the local high school for 30 years before retiring, and Linda Chen, who ran a successful catering business. The conversation flowed easily through topics ranging from local politics to book recommendations to travel plans. About halfway through lunch, Margaret mentioned that she had seen my work on the hotel project and complimented the branding design. "It's so refreshing to see young women building successful careers," she said. "When I was starting out, there were so many barriers. It's wonderful that your generation has more opportunities." "Thank you," I replied. "Though I have to say, at 42, I'm not sure I qualify as young anymore." Margaret laughed. "42 is absolutely young from where I'm sitting. I didn't even start my master's degree until I was 45. My husband thought I was crazy, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made." Linda nodded in agreement. "I started my catering business when I was 38, after my youngest went to kindergarten. My mother-in-law kept asking when I was going to stop playing restaurant and focus on being a proper wife. 20 years later, I employ 12 people and cater events all over the state." The conversation that followed was revelatory. These women, most of them my mother's age or older, began sharing stories about the times they had defied expectations, taken risks, pursued dreams that others had deemed inappropriate or unrealistic. Margaret had backpacked through Europe at 50. Linda had learned to scuba dive at 60. Another woman had started writing romance novels at 65 and was now published. I glanced at my mother, who was listening to these stories with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was she surprised to learn that her conservative social circle included so many women who had refused to accept limitations based on age or social expectations? Had she assumed that her friends would share her views about appropriate behavior for women at different life stages? As the luncheon wound down and we prepared to leave, Margaret pulled me aside. "Your mother talks about you all the time," she said. "She's so proud of how you've rebuilt your life after your divorce. It takes real courage to start over at any age." I was genuinely surprised. "She talks about me." "Oh yes, constantly. She brags about your business success, about what a wonderful mother you are to Emma, about how impressed she is with your independence. She worries about you, of course, but that's what mothers do." This revelation shifted something in my understanding of my mother's behavior. While she had been criticizing me to my face, She had apparently been defending and celebrating me to her friends. The disconnect was puzzling and somehow heartbreaking. On the drive home, I decided to address it directly. Margaret said you talk about me to your book club friends. My mother's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. You're my daughter, of course I talk about you. She said you brag about my independence and my business success. That's interesting, considering how often you've criticized those same things when we're alone. We sat at a red light in silence for several long moments. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. It's complicated, she said. I am proud of you. I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, everything you've overcome, but I'm also terrified for you. Terrified of what? Of what people will say, of what they'll think, of the way they'll judge you for being a divorced woman who dresses young and lives alone and seems to be enjoying it too much. The light turned green, and we drove through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood while I processed what she had just revealed. Her criticism hadn't been about my actual choices. It had been about her fear of other people's potential criticism of those choices. Mom, I said carefully, whose opinions are you worried about? Because the women at that luncheon seemed pretty impressed with independent women who take risks and build their own lives. Not everyone is as open-minded as Margaret and Linda, she replied. There are still people who think divorced women are desperate, that women our age should step aside and let younger people take center stage, that dressing nicely after 40 means you're trying too hard, and you care what those people think. Another long pause. I care what they think about you. I care that they might hurt you with their judgment or their gossip. I've spent so many years protecting you from that kind of cruelty that I forgot to consider whether you actually needed protection. We pulled into her driveway, but neither of us moved to get out of the car. This conversation felt too important to interrupt with the mechanics of arrival. When I was your age, my mother continued, women who got divorced were treated like pariahs. We were seen as failures, as cautionary tales, as threats to other people's marriages. I watched friends go through that humiliation, and I never wanted you to experience it. So you tried to make me invisible. I tried to make you safe. I understood now why she had spent so many years trying to dim my light. In her mind, visibility equaled vulnerability. Standing out meant inviting criticism. Being confident meant setting yourself up for a fall. But her protective instincts had been calibrated for a world that no longer existed if it ever had. The women at today's luncheon were proof that there were plenty of people who celebrated female independence, rather than condemning it, who saw confidence as attractive rather than threatening, who understood that life didn't end at 40 or 50 or 60. I appreciate that you wanted to protect me, I said. But I need you to trust that I can handle whatever criticism comes my way. I need you to believe that Emma and I are strong enough to navigate a world that might not always approve of our choices. What if you get hurt? Then I'll heal. And Emma will learn that women can survive other people's disapproval, that our worth isn't determined by consensus opinion, that it's better to be authentically ourselves and face criticism than to be safe and invisible. My mother turned to look at me directly for the first time since we'd gotten in the car. When did you become so wise? When I realized the alternative to taking risks was disappearing entirely. 3 months later, my mother called to invite me to her friend Patricia's retirement party. It's going to be a fancy affair, she said. Patricia specifically requested that people dress up. She wants to feel celebrated. What are you wearing? I asked. I bought a new dress, my mother said, and there was something almost mischievous in her voice. It's burgundy, and it has these lovely cap sleeves, and Patricia is going to love it. It sounds beautiful. What about you? What are you planning to wear? I smiled, recognizing the shift in her question. She wasn't telling me what to wear or warning me about appropriateness. She was simply curious about my choice, the way one adult might ask another. I have a dress I've been saving for a special occasion, I said. It's emerald green with a wrap style, very elegant. The one you wore to my birthday party. No, this is a different one, though I still love that dress too. I'd like to see you in the new one, she said. I bet you'll look stunning. The retirement party was everything Patricia had hoped for, elegant, celebratory, and full of people who genuinely cared about honoring her 40-year career in education. My mother and I arrived together, both of us dressed in a way that made us feel confident and beautiful. Throughout the evening, I watched my mother interact with her friends and was struck by how much more relaxed she seemed. She laughed more freely, engaged more openly in conversations, and even accepted several compliments on her own appearance with grace rather than deflection. At one point, I overheard her talking to a group of women about Emma's college plans. "She's so independent," my mother was saying. "Gets that from her mother. Jessica has really shown her what it means to be a strong woman." Later, as we were preparing to leave, Patricia pulled us both aside. "Thank you both for coming," she said. "And Jessica, I have to tell you, your mother never stops talking about how proud she is of you. She says you're the bravest person she knows." I looked at my mother in surprise. "Brave, starting over after your divorce, building your business, raising Emma to be so confident and independent," Patricia continued. "Your mother says you're living proof that women can reinvent themselves at any age." On the drive home, I asked my mother about Patricia's comments. "Do you really think I'm brave?" "I think you're the bravest person I know," she said, without hesitation. "I think you've done things I was too scared to do, made choices I was too afraid to make. I think you've shown me what it looks like to live authentically instead of safely. Is that why you bought the burgundy dress?" She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. "Maybe, or maybe I just got tired of trying to disappear." We drove through the quiet streets in comfortable silence, two women who had finally figured out how to love each other without one of them having to become smaller. It had taken 42 years and a green dress and a lot of difficult conversations, but we had found our way to a relationship based on mutual respect rather than control. When Emma came home from her father's house the next weekend, I told her about the retirement party and the conversations with her grandmother. "She's really changing," I said. "She's starting to understand that criticizing my choices wasn't protecting me. It was limiting both of us." "Good," Emma said with the satisfaction of someone who had been proved right. "I never understood why she thought you should hide how awesome you are." That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror that had become a symbol of my journey toward self-acceptance. The woman looking back at me was confident, independent, and unapologetically herself. She was a woman who had learned to take up space, to speak her truth, to dress in ways that celebrated her body and her spirit. She was a woman who had taught her daughter that there was no expiration date on confidence, no age limit on beauty, no point at which women were required to step aside and fade into the background. She was a woman who had finally learned the difference between love and control, between protection and imprisonment, between fitting in and belonging. The green dress was still hanging in my closet, along with the burgundy one and several others that made me feel powerful and beautiful and completely myself. They were more than clothes, they were declarations of independence, celebrations of authenticity, reminders that I had the right to be seen and admired and desired regardless of what anyone else thought about women my age. And my mother, who had spent so many years trying to make me smaller, was finally learning to celebrate the space I took up in the world. It was never too late to change, never too late to grow, never too late to choose love over fear. The green dress had started a revolution, but the real victory was quieter and deeper than any single moment of defiance. The real victory was in the daily choice to be myself, fully and without apology, and to teach the women in my life that they could do the same. 1 year later, everything changed again, but this time in ways I never could have anticipated. Emma had just started her senior year of high school when she came home from school with news that would test everything we had learned about family, acceptance, and standing up for what we believed in. "Mom," she said, dropping her backpack by the door with unusual heaviness, "I need to tell you something important." I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, but something in her tone made me turn off the stove and give her my full attention. "What's going on? You know how Grandma has been doing so much better lately, how she's been more supportive and less critical." I nodded, curious about where this was heading. "Well, she's about to be tested in a big way." Emma took a deep breath. "I'm bringing someone to family dinner on Sunday, and I need you to prepare her because this person is going to challenge every assumption she's ever made about appropriate behavior." My mind immediately went to the obvious possibilities. Are you dating someone new? Not exactly dating, Emma said carefully. But yes, there's someone special I want the family to meet. Someone who's been really important to me for the past few months. Okay, I said, settling into a kitchen chair. Tell me about this person. Emma sat down across from me, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to reveal. Her name is Riley, and she's incredible. She's smart and funny and kind, and she makes me feel like the best version of myself. She's also 23, which I know sounds like a big age gap, but she's a graduate student at the university, and we met when she was tutoring me in calculus. I processed this information carefully. Emma was 17, turning 18 in 3 months. Riley was 23. The age gap wasn't enormous, but it was significant enough to raise questions, especially given that Emma was still in high school. How long have you been seeing each other? I asked. 3 months, Emma said. I know what you're thinking, and yes, the age difference is something we've talked about extensively. She was actually hesitant to pursue anything romantic because of it, but we connect on such a deep level that we decided to take things slowly and see where it leads. And you want to bring her to Sunday dinner? I want to bring her to Sunday dinner, Emma confirmed. Because she's important to me, and I want my family to meet her. But I also want to give Grandma a heads up because Riley doesn't exactly fit the traditional mold of what she might expect. I was already imagining my mother's reaction to learning that her granddaughter was involved with an older woman. The progress we had made in our relationship was significant, but this would be uncharted territory for all of us. What specifically should I prepare her for? I asked. Emma smiled, and I could see both nervousness and excitement in her expression. Riley has purple hair, multiple piercings, and a full-sleeve tattoo. She rides a motorcycle, studies feminist literature, and has very strong opinions about social justice. She's also one of the most respectful, intelligent people I've ever met. I couldn't help but laugh at the image of my conservative mother's face when Emma walked in with this person. You're really going to give her the full test, aren't you? I'm going to give her the chance to practice what she's been preaching, Emma said seriously. She spent the last year learning to accept that you dress differently than she would prefer, that you live your life on your own terms, that women don't have to fit into neat little boxes to be worthy of love and respect. Now she gets to decide if those lessons extend to her granddaughter's choices too. The conversation with my mother went about as well as I expected, which is to say it was awkward, tense and full of loaded pauses. I had called her Friday evening to give her the weekend to process before Sunday dinner. 23, she repeated when I finished explaining the situation. Emma is 17 years old, Jessica. This woman is practically an adult, while Emma is still a child. Emma turns 18 in 3 months, I said. And she's one of the most mature teenagers I know. You've said so yourself. That's different, and you know it. This woman should know better than to pursue a relationship with someone so much younger. I could hear the panic creeping into my mother's voice, the same fear-based reaction that had driven her criticism of my choices for so many years. Mom, I said carefully, Emma is going to be an adult very soon. She's smart, she's thoughtful, and she's capable of making her own decisions about relationships. But what about college? What about her future? What if this woman distracts her from her goals? What if this woman supports her goals? I countered. What if this relationship teaches Emma about mutual respect and healthy communication? What if judging it before you even meet Riley is exactly the kind of thinking we've been working to move past? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear my mother's internal struggle between her protective instincts and her newfound commitment to accepting, rather than controlling, the women in her family. Will you at least meet her before you decide she's wrong for Emma? I asked. Of course I'll meet her, my mother said, though her tone suggested she wasn't looking forward to it. But Jessica, if this woman is taking advantage of Emma's youth or inexperience, I'm going to have something to say about it.
Fair enough, I said. But if she's treating Emma with love and respect, I hope you'll have something to say about that too. Sunday dinner arrived with all the tension I had anticipated. Emma spent an hour getting ready, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a sundress that was pretty but conservative enough not to add fuel to any potential fire. I could tell she was nervous about how her family would react to Riley,
but also determined to present her relationship with pride rather than apology. Riley arrived precisely on time, which I took as a good sign. She was exactly as Emma had described, purple hair cut in a stylish asymmetrical bob, several ear piercings, and what appeared to be the edge of an intricate tattoo peeking out from beneath her long-sleeved shirt. But she was also polite, articulate, and clearly nervous about making a good impression. "Mrs. Morrison," she said when Emma introduced us, "thank you so much for including me in your family dinner. Emma talks about you constantly, and it's wonderful to finally meet you. Please call me Jessica," I said, immediately liking her direct eye contact and genuine smile. "Emma's told me a lot about you too. She says you're studying literature, feminist literary criticism, specifically," Riley said. "I'm working on my master's thesis about women's voices in 20th century poetry. It's probably not the most practical degree, but I'm passionate about it." We talked for a few minutes about her studies, and I was impressed by her intelligence and articulation. She clearly cared deeply about her academic work, and she spoke about Emma's own intellectual curiosity with genuine admiration and respect. My mother arrived 30 minutes later, and I watched her face carefully as Emma made the introductions. To her credit, my mother's expression remained politely neutral, though I could see her taking inventory of Riley's appearance with the thorough assessment of someone who had spent decades judging books by their covers. "Riley," my mother said, extending her hand for a formal handshake. "Emma tells me you're helping her with calculus." "I was," Riley said, though she hardly needed the help. "Emma is one of the most naturally gifted math students I've worked with. Her analytical thinking skills are remarkable." I could see my mother processing this compliment, weighing it against her preconceptions about people who looked like Riley. The dinner conversation that followed was carefully polite, with Riley answering questions about her background, her studies, and her future plans with thoughtful, well-articulated responses. What became clear over the course of the meal was that Riley was not only intelligent and respectful, but also genuinely invested in Emma's well-being and future success. She talked about Emma's college applications with detailed knowledge and enthusiasm, mentioned books she had recommended to help Emma with her English literature essays, and spoke about Emma's goals with the kind of supportive pride that indicated deep emotional investment. "What are your intentions with my granddaughter?" my mother asked directly about halfway through dinner, clearly deciding to address the elephant in the room. Riley didn't flinch at the question. "I care about Emma very much," she said. "I think she's an exceptional person with a bright future ahead of her. My intention is to support her in achieving her goals while hopefully building something meaningful together. I understand the age difference raises questions, and I take that responsibility seriously." "What does that mean exactly?" my mother pressed. "It means I'm conscious of the power dynamic inherent in our age difference," Riley said. "It means I'm committed to ensuring that our relationship enhances rather than limits Emma's opportunities. It means I encourage her independence and decision-making, rather than trying to influence or control her choices." I watched Emma during this exchange, seeing how she held herself with confidence and maturity, how she looked at Riley with clear affection and respect, how she seemed genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen since before her father and I divorced. After dinner, while Emma and Riley were looking at photo albums in the living room, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "She's not what I expected," my mother said quietly. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone taking advantage of Emma's youth, someone immature or irresponsible, someone who would derail her future plans. And what do you think now?" My mother was quiet for a moment, loading plates into the dishwasher with more attention than the task required. "I think she's clearly intelligent and articulate. I think she genuinely cares about Emma. I think the age difference still concerns me, but I can see that Emma is happy. But," I could hear the hesitation in her voice, "but what are people going to say? What are Emma's friends' parents going to think? What happens when she goes to college and people find out she's dating someone who looks like that?" And there it was again, the fear of other people's judgment, the worry about appearances, the assumption that love and acceptance were contingent on fitting into narrow definitions of appropriate behavior. "Mom," I said, turning to face her directly, "do you remember what you told me about protecting me from judgment? About how you tried to make me safe by making me invisible?" She nodded reluctantly. "This is the same thing. You're asking Emma to hide or minimize a relationship that clearly makes her happy because you're worried about what other people might think. Is that really the lesson you want to teach her? But this is different, my mother protested. This isn't just about clothes or appearance. This is about a relationship that could affect her entire future. How could it affect her future? Riley is encouraging her college plans, supporting her academic goals, treating her with respect and care. What exactly are you afraid of? My mother sat down at the kitchen table, looking suddenly exhausted. I'm afraid Emma will face the same judgment and criticism that you faced after your divorce. I'm afraid people will make assumptions about her character based on her choice of partner. I'm afraid she'll be hurt by people who don't understand. And what if she is? I asked, sitting down across from her. What if some people do judge her or make assumptions? Should she give up someone who makes her happy to avoid that possibility? I just want her to be safe. Safe from what? From love, from learning about herself and what she values in a relationship, from discovering that she's strong enough to handle other people's opinions. We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the sound of Emma and Riley's conversation drifting in from the living room. They were talking about Emma's college essay, with Riley offering suggestions and encouragement in equal measure. When I was Emma's age, my mother said finally, I dated someone my parents disapproved of. He was older, from a different social class, and they were convinced he would ruin my life. So I broke up with him to make them happy. This was the first time I had ever heard this story. What happened to him? He became a successful architect, married a lovely woman, and from what I hear, has lived a very happy life. And I always wondered what might have been if I had trusted my own judgment instead of my parents' fears. I reached across the table and took her hand. You don't have to make the same mistake with Emma. But what if I'm right to be concerned? What if this relationship does cause problems for her? Then she'll handle them, I said. And she'll learn that she's strong enough to make her own choices and deal with the consequences. And she'll know that her family supports her regardless of what other people think. My mother squeezed my hand and nodded slowly. You're right. I know you're right. It's just so hard to watch her potentially face criticism when I could try to steer her away from it. But you can't steer her away from it forever, I said. Eventually she has to navigate the world on her own terms. The best thing we can do is teach her that she's strong enough to handle whatever comes her way. When we returned to the living room, Riley was showing Emma something on her phone, and both of them were laughing. The sight of my daughter's genuine happiness was worth whatever judgment or criticism might come from people who couldn't see past Riley's purple hair and tattoos to the kind, intelligent woman underneath. Riley, my mother said, sitting down in her favorite armchair, tell me about this thesis you're working on. For the next hour, my mother and Riley engaged in a surprisingly animated discussion about feminist literature, social justice, and the importance of diverse voices in academia. I watched my mother's demeanor shift from polite tolerance to genuine interest as Riley shared her passion for her studies and her commitment to using education as a tool for social change. You know, my mother said as Riley and Emma were preparing to leave, I taught high school for 10 years before Emma's grandfather and I got married. I always regretted giving up teaching, but it wasn't really considered acceptable for married women to work back then. That's exactly the kind of social expectation my research addresses. The way women's ambitions were systematically discouraged to maintain traditional family structures. It's fascinating from an academic perspective, but it must have been incredibly frustrating to live through. It was, my mother said quietly. I often wonder what my life might have looked like if I had felt free to make different choices. As Emma and Riley said their goodbyes, I could see that something fundamental had shifted in my mother's perception. Riley wasn't a threat to Emma's future. She was an example of what was possible when women refused to be limited by other people's expectations. After they left, my mother and I sat on her front porch, watching the sunset and processing everything that had happened. She's good for Emma, my mother said finally. I think so too, and Emma is happy, she really is. I suppose that's what matters most, my mother said. Not what she looks like, or what people might think, but whether she treats Emma well and supports her goals. Is this you officially approving of the relationship? My mother laughed, a sound that had become much more frequent over the past year. This is me officially minding my own business and trusting Emma's judgment. It's a new concept for me,
but I'm learning. 6 months later, Emma graduated as valedictorian of her high school class. Riley was there, cheering louder than anyone when Emma's name was called. My mother was there too, beaming with pride and taking dozens of photos to share with her book club friends. At the graduation party we threw in Emma's honor, I watched my mother introduce Riley to various family friends and neighbors. Gone were the apologetic explanations or defensive justifications. Instead, she simply said, "This is Riley, Emma's girlfriend. She's studying feminist literature at the university." Some people's reactions were predictably judgmental. There were raised eyebrows, disapproving looks, and whispered comments about Emma being too young to know what she wanted. But there were also people who responded with genuine interest and acceptance, who asked Riley thoughtful questions about her studies and complimented Emma on her academic achievements. What struck me most was how my mother handled the negative reactions. Instead of becoming defensive or apologetic, she simply redirected the conversation back to Emma's accomplishments. When one neighbor made a snide comment about Emma's phase, my mother looked her directly in the eye and said, "Emma has always been wise beyond her years. I trust her judgment completely." Later that evening, as we were cleaning up after the party, Emma pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For teaching me that I don't have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable. For showing me that it's okay to live authentically even when it makes some people upset. For fighting with Grandma so that she could learn to accept us both for who we really are." I hugged my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had learned to navigate the world with confidence and authenticity, who had chosen love over fear, who understood that other people's approval was not a prerequisite for her own happiness. "You did that yourself," I told her. "I just provided the example." As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. It had started with a green dress and my mother's criticism about age-appropriate behavior. It had evolved into a deeper examination of control versus love, of protection versus empowerment, of fitting in versus belonging. The real victory wasn't that my mother had learned to accept my clothing choices or Emma's relationship decisions. The real victory was that 3 generations of women in our family had learned to choose authenticity over approval, to value substance over appearance, to support each other's right to live fully and freely, regardless of what anyone else thought. The green dress was still hanging in my closet, though it had been joined by many others that made me feel confident and beautiful and completely myself. But more than that, it had become a symbol of the courage to be seen, to take up space, to refuse to apologize for existing in all our complicated, imperfect, magnificent humanity. Emma was heading to college in the fall, where she would undoubtedly face new challenges and make new choices that some people would approve of and others would criticize. But she was armed with the knowledge that she was strong enough to handle both praise and judgment, that her worth wasn't determined by consensus opinion, that love and acceptance from the people who truly mattered were not contingent on conformity. And my mother, who had spent so many years trying to protect us by making us smaller, had finally learned that the best protection she could offer was teaching us to believe in our own strength, our own judgment, our own right to happiness. The green dress had started a revolution, but the real transformation was quieter and deeper than any single act of rebellion. It was in the daily choice to be ourselves, fully and without apology. It was in the decision to teach the next generation that there was no expiration date on confidence, no age limit on growth, no point at which we were required to stop evolving and becoming. It was in the understanding that love without acceptance wasn't really love at all, and that the greatest gift we could give each other was the freedom to be authentically, courageously, unapologetically ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.